Hello, Music 12 students. Here is the lecture video for Chapter 9, Music for Political Expression. In this chapter, we're going to look at how does music play into the role of nationhood, national character, and the many ways that we use songs to represent our patriotic side or maybe just our collective culture as a nation. And many of these national anthems have very interesting histories. So this week, we're going to take a look at some 20th century national anthems. The United States of America's The Star-Spangled Banner. For Germany, the Songs of the Germans, although we'll look at several of the songs over the years. In South Africa, National Anthem of South Africa. And then Israel, Hatkiva, which means the hope. We're also going to look at how does in Western art music we also see national identity expressed. We're going to look specifically at the Moldau by Bedrich Smetana and how this shows Czech identity, as well as Hungarian Dance Number 2 by Franz Lizst, which relates to Hungarian Verbunkos music, which we'll learn about, and then Romanian Dances from Romania by Bela Bartok, which also shows a side of Hungarian music in the region of Hungary, which we'll talk about a little bit. Next, we have Contesting the Representation of American Musical Identity. This is very interesting in how does American music for the concert stage going to come about. We see two different examples here with different philosophies behind them. One is Symphony Number 9, which is called the New World Symphony by Antonín Dvořák, and the Gaelic Symphony by Amy Beach, both composers who worked in America, but one who was from Europe and came to America, and the other one who was of European descent, but was born in the United States. So they have different views on how American musical identity comes to the stage. And then last, we're going to look at national representation in style and instrumentation. So how can an instrument by itself stand for or represent a whole nation or a whole country? So we're going to look first at the Carnival tradition and also Tamboo bamboo music. We'll also look at some genres from Trinidad and Tobago, including calypso, seco, and steel band music. And some of the examples here are very eclectic. We'll see Symphony Number 5 by Ludwig van Beethoven, but played by the Trinidadian steel band. And then two versions of a seco song called Full Extreme by the Ultimate Rejects, but that will be covered by a steel band called the Trinidad All-Stars. And also I included a nice example of Exodus Steel Orchestra, another one of these fantastic steel bands of Trinidad and Tobago. So let's start thinking about how does music play into political expression. You might also think, how does music play into your own personal relationship with your country or maybe your culture of origin? So let's go ahead and jump in. In a sense, all music is political. No form of music expression is detached from issues of class, race, nationality, and identity. If we argue that a Mozart string quartet is free from all political concerns, we ignore the fact that Mozart lived and worked in Vienna, the powerful German-speaking seat of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. We ignore the fact that the 18th century string quartets embodied Enlightenment-era political values regarding equality and rational discourse. And we ignore the fact that Mozart music is used today to represent elite cultural values. So already we're seeing that really all music is created in some kind of political or national environment. We can't really escape the way that the music was made or where it was made. It's a part of how it was brought into being. Let's continue here. In this chapter and the next, however, we will be exploring forms of musical expression that are explicitly political. We will examine a variety of musical works that were created to express or challenge political values. We will also encounter musical works that were not intended by their creators to contribute to political discourse, but that were co-opted and repurposed by political actors. In this chapter, we will be considering the power of music to define and identify nations. The idea that music can express something important about a community has a long history. The ancient Greeks, for example, believed that the unique musical styles of each regional tribe represented the characteristics of that tribe. Moreover, they believed music to be so powerful that anyone who heard music from a particular tribe would in turn exhibit the characteristics of its members. Of course, for us to believe that music can express something about a group of people, we must first agree that all members of the group share something fundamental in common. This can be dangerous, for it invites the exclusion of any member who does not conform. Any claim that a piece or style of music represents a nation should be met with the question, what members of the nation does this music fail to represent? So, to put it simply, the breakdown here, imagine if someone said, um, what is American music? Well, think of all the different styles that come from American music. We have jazz, first and foremost, is the one true American music. But now also we have rock music. We have cumbia from Mexico. We have rap and hip hop. We have country music. We have alternative music. We have indie music. The list goes on and on. So we can't really say that um, this can ever be specific, but we do find that we can find music that stands for the country, but does it include everybody? And we're going to ask those questions through this chapter. Now let's get into national anthems. The most explicitly political genre of music is the national anthem. Almost every country has one today, but national anthems have actually not been in use for very long. The first national anthem was God Save the Queen, adopted by Great Britain in 1745. European countries began adopting anthems in the mid-19th century. This is the same period during which many modern European countries first came into existence, including Germany and Italy. This was also a period of growing nationalism. Artists, philosophers, and politicians generally agreed that people who shared an ethnic and linguistic heritage were somehow bound together and should belong to the same nation. Populations that shared such a heritage, the Hungarians, for example, who were governed by German speakers, or the Poles, who were governed by Russians, began to campaign for independence. Members of all ethnic groups generally agreed that art could express the characteristics of their people, whether or not they had secured autonomous rule. An official anthem became a means of documenting national values and expressing national pride. So, as we're already seeing here, we have new countries being formed during this time of the 1800s um, and mid 1700s. But we also see the creation of countries like Germany and Italy. But also, we see examples where there are groups of people like Hungarians who were governed by people who spoke German. So we have these cultures within countries or within soon to be countries where maybe we have different cultures that are being controlled by different people and they're wanting independence. This is going to be a through line through the chapter that we'll also see in many of the examples, including South Africa and Trinidad and Tobago. Even in Germany, we see now. Okay, let's continue. So we're already gone past question 1. We're in the midst of question 2 right now here on slide 4. National anthems play an important role in shaping an individual's relationship with the nation. To begin with, anthems are often sung in unison by large groups of people. Recent research has revealed that singing in a community increases levels of oxytocin, a hormone that is closely associated with interpersonal bonding. Singing together, therefore, actively promotes feelings of closeness and community solidarity. Group singing also causes participants' breathing and heart rates to synchronize. Finally, studies have revealed that singing with other people promotes altruism, raises trust levels, and improves cooperation. It even raises pain thresholds. When groups of people sing the national anthem, therefore, they are not inspired only by the words or music. The experience of singing together itself reinforces national identity. So maybe you felt this at a sporting event, even at your high school perhaps, when you all sing the school song or when you sing the national anthem. there is kind of a sense of being together and feeling that national pride, perhaps. National anthems can also play a more abstract role in binding a nation together. The ritual of singing or hearing the anthem at sporting events and ceremonies helps us to feel connected with the nation and with one another. Whenever we sing or hear the anthem, we can imagine millions of other fellow citizens doing the same. We will never meet or even see the vast majority of these people, but the national anthem unites us, for it is the one song that everyone in the nation knows. That fact gives it a great symbolic power. Of course, the specific words and tunes of anthems are also significant. It is difficult, however, to make generalizations about anthem texts and melodies, for there is a great deal of variety. To understand how the character and history of an anthem can reflect a nation's identity, we will look at some examples. So we're moving into question 3 now, here on slides 5 through 7, getting into one of our first examples, which will be the Star-Spangled Banner for this chapter here. And you've probably heard this a million times, but maybe do you know the history of how the song was written? So that's what we're going to learn about. How was the song written, under what circumstances, and where were the lyrics actually originating from, and how were they shared with the public? So here we get into our own national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. As is the case with almost every national anthem, the words and the tune to the Star-Spangled Banner were created by different people at different times. The tune is several decades older than the text, but our story will begin with a famous poem by Francis Scott Key. During the War of 1812, Key traveled with a delegation to the British flagship HMS Tonnant to negotiate a prisoner exchange. Although Key and his compatriots were successful in their mission, they were held captive after overhearing British officers plan an attack on the city of Baltimore. So here we see he's going out to this British warship, and while he's with his fellow Americans during the War of 1812, they hear about plans of an attack on the city of Baltimore. So again, 1812, America has already formed as a country in 1776, but now we're still seeing some battles with the British. Francis Scott Key subsequently witnessed the nighttime battle from aboard a British ship, so the attack on Baltimore. Famously, he knew that the American forces had emerged victorious when he saw that their flag flying over Fort McHenry in the morning light on September 14th, 1814. Key began his poem on board the ship and finished it shortly after his release from captivity. The text of his earliest surviving draft appears below, transcribed from his handwritten manuscript. So here we can see the original manuscript of Francis Scott Key's poem that he wrote while aboard this British ship, seeing the battle take place, but knowing eventually that the Americans did win that particular battle. Originally Untitled, Key's poem was first printed in Baltimore a few days later, probably on September 17th, in a broadside entitled Defense of Fort McHenry. Broadsides, which were single sheets of paper printed on one side only, were commonplace in larger cities during the 18th and 19th centuries. Their texts often dealt with topics of the day, and they frequently carried news of recent scandal, accident, crime, or execution. Such texts could be written, typeset, printed, and distributed very quickly, so broadsides were an effective means of spreading information. More specifically, Defense of Fort McHenry was printed as a broadside ballad, so in addition to providing a ballad text, Key's poem, for example, it named the popular tune to which the text was to be sung. Because buyers already knew the currently popular tunes, they could immediately sing the new lyrics. This type of songwriting differs greatly from the approach common today, in which a single person typically creates both the lyrics and the melody, or at least works with a songwriter partner who provides the missing half. Reusing another composer's melody would not only seem to lack creativity, but would probably result in a lawsuit in modern day. So to describe this one more time, in this day and age, in the broadside, which is essentially an old-time newspaper, just one side printed though, They would put the lyrics to songs, in this case it was Key's poem, but they would also tell you, you can sing these words to the melody of this already popular song. So this is a way to get songs out to the public quickly because people already know the songs. And it's a way of, not having to create original music for everything. You're just setting it to another popular rhyme scheme of another song. Let's continue here. It is not clear that Key himself had any particular melody in mind when he wrote Defense of Fort McHenry, or that he ever intended for it to be sung. However, he had written song texts before. Indeed, various lines and images included in his September 1814 poem first appeared in his 1805 song called When the Warrior Returns. Perhaps for this reason, the 1814 poem had the same pattern of syllables and rhymes as Key's previous effort, and therefore fit the same tune. In the Defense of Fort McHenry broadside, between an introduction describing the fort's bombardment and the poem's text, there appears the indication, tuned, Anacreon in heaven. Pairing the text with this melody produces a ballad, a narrative strophic song. A strophic song is one in which each stanza of text is sung to the same melody. That's a term that we've seen before, strophic song. So he's already indicating that the tune would be Anacreon in Heaven, which is another popular song. We'll learn a little bit about that here. This tune, which we recognize today as the melody of the Star-Spangled Banner, was composed by John Stafford Smith around 1776, and first published with lyrics by Ralph Tomlinson as the Anacreonatic Song around 1779. The song was also widely known as To Anacreon in Heaven, which are the opening words. Tomlinson's lyrics celebrate the ancient Greek poet Anacreon, who wrote about love, wine, and amusements. Smith and Tomlinson created their song for the Anacreonatic Society, a London gentlemen's club founded around 1766. Its members were amateur musicians who desired to promote the arts and enjoy one another's company. Their meetings included a concert, dinner, and light entertainment, and they sang To Anacreon in Heaven, the Society's constitutional song, after finishing their meal, the point at which the fun really began. Although the Anacreonatic Society occasionally aspired to higher things, it was essentially a drinking club, and a rather lively one by all reports. The society was shut down in 1782 after a visit by the Duchess of Devonshire provoked controversy over some lewd after-dinner songs. Though the society had lasted for only a few decades, To Anacreon in Heaven was a hit. It quickly became popular with the creators of broadside ballads and accumulated a large number of texts. When Defense of Fort McHenry appeared, therefore, the tune's indication allowed any purchaser to immediately sing the ballad. So here we see this is the original tune, actually comes from this drinking society that was called the Anacreonatic Society. And again, To Anacreon was this Greek poet who wrote about love, wine, and amusement. So it was almost like a drinking song. The Star-Spangled Banner, as it came to be known, joined a pantheon of patriotic 19th century songs. It quickly gained popularity, but was generally overshadowed by Hail Columbia and America, which is My Country 'Tis of Thee. The Star-Spangled Banner faced significant criticism as a national song. The leading objection was that it was simply too difficult to sing. Indeed, its melodic range, which is an octave and a fifth, that means it's about 13 notes wide in its tessitura, is unusually wide for a national anthem, and all but professional singers struggle to reach the highest notes. The melody is also characterized by disjunct motion. That is to say, the notes of the melody do not simply move up and down the scale, but instead are separated by larger intervals. So there are big jumps between the notes of the melody. Others complained that its text, too specifically tied to a unique historical event, failed to reflect national values more generally. Finally, it has been criticized for its militaristic subject matter. All the same, the song slowly gained traction, first becoming popular at Independence Day celebrations. In 1899, the U.S. Navy adopted the Star-Spangled Banner for official use, and in 1916, President Woodrow Wilson ordered that it be played at all military events. By the early 1900s, many variations of the song's tune had arisen, so in 1917, President Wilson commissioned 5 prominent musicians, Walter Damrosch, Will Earhart, Arnold J. Gantvort, Oscar Sonek, and John Philip Sousa, to agree on and publish a standardized version. Baseball fans began singing the song at games beginning in 1918. Finally, on March 3, 1931, President Herbert Hoover signed a bill designating the Star-Spangled Banner as the national anthem of the United States. The legislation had become championed by Representative John Linthicum of Baltimore, who understandably had taken an interest in promoting a local song. He was successful only in following extensive debate over the song's merits and deficiencies and the consideration of several alternatives, including America the Beautiful. So here we see the standardized version that was led by John Stafford Smith. There's the original songwriter with words by Francis Scott that was worked on by this team of 5 musicians, including very famous band leader John Philip Sousa. So already a very interesting background for this song. There have been countless performances of the Star-Spangled Banner, most indifferent, but most exceptionally good or bad. It seems that a video of another national anthem fail circulates about once a year, but what is it that makes a bad performance? Sometimes, as in the case of Christina Aguilera's performance at the 2011 Super Bowl, is because the singer forgets the words. Sometimes, in the case of Victoria Zarlanga's rendition at the international soccer match in 2012, is because the singer can't stay on key. And sometimes, as in the case of Fergie's performance at a 2018 NBA All-Star game, is because the singer takes an interpretive approach that is considered inappropriate. Fergie's sexy, jazz-inspired version of the national anthem provoked laughter and backlash. So what makes a good performance? These vary as well, but they usually share certain characteristics. First of all of the notes and words are correct. Second, the accompaniment, if present at all, is in appropriate style. Many successful renditions use military band instruments, which are conducive to patriotic expression. Third, the singing style needs to come across as dignified. This can mean several things. Singers with various backgrounds, including R&B, pop, rock, and opera, have all given successful performances. But the singer can't sound like they're showing off, and they can't sound like they are trying to entertain. These unspoken rules can turn performing the national anthem into a nerve-wracking experience, for it is difficult to predict how audiences will interpret what they hear. One of the most highly praised renditions of the national anthem was given by Whitney Houston at the 1991 Super Bowl. In examining her performance, we will consider how she blended her personal style with patriotic signifiers to satisfy the crowd. Houston's performance starts off with the sounds of the snare drum, a clear reference to marching music that simultaneously signifies the U.S. military and captures the mood of disciplined patriotism that would attend a military review. The sounds might also spark a sense of pride in the listener, or perhaps responsibility. It might make them stand up a little bit straighter. A trumpet fanfare precedes Houston's entrance. When she does begin to sing, she is accompanied by a full brass ensemble, which underpins her lyrics with the power, volume, and brilliant timbre of a military band. This orchestration remains consistent throughout the first A section of the musical form. But with the second A section, when she says, "Whose broad stripes?" there's a significant change in the sound of the performance. Suddenly, Houston is backed by not a military band, but soaring strings, whose shimmering timbre and connected articulation contrasts with what we have just heard. And that's not all. The strings also play harmonies that are significantly more adventurous and less predictable than those provided by the brass ensemble. The second A, therefore, is more meditative and introspective. It replaces an expression of military might with one of emotional complexity. And here we see a picture of Whitney Houston. Houston emphasizes this contrast with her vocal production. She sings the first A section in a fairly straightforward manner, using the full power of her voice. This is with the brass. In the second A section, however, she both reduces her volume and increases her use of ornamentation. Melodic ornaments, in this case, are any notes that are not included in the most basic version of the Star-Spangled Banner, the version you might sing at a sporting event or patriotic celebration. So she's adding ornamented notes, so adding notes that are maybe not key to the melody, but that give it a sense of her personal style by adding extra musical material and kind of stylizing it. You can also hear how Houston changes her vocal production. Her sound becomes breathy and subdued, the result in some cases of using head voice instead of chest voice. So these are two different parts of your singing voice that you can access as a singer. Is your head voice, which is typically higher, and then your chest voice, which is a little bit more deep sounding and resonant in a different way. The mood changes again when we arrive at the B section and the rockets. The brass and percussion rejoin the strings, while Houston abandons her airy timbre and gives us the full power of her voice. The orchestra is primarily there to accompany the singer, but every once in a while, a brass fanfare emerges from the texture. The climax of the anthem is accentuated by both the singer and the orchestra. On the word free, Houston adds a melodic ornament that takes her to the highest note of the performance, an interval of a fourth above the top note in the official version. Then, when she arrives at Brave, the orchestra plays an unexpected harmony that prolongs the final cadence. In other words, we have to wait a few extra seconds before it feels like the song is really over. So these are some things that make her performance unique, but it just does it effectively. She's not going beyond our expectations. She's actually heightening the drama in a way that I think is very compelling. And here is Whitney Houston's performance, just the audio of the Star-Spangled Banner that was at the 1991 Super Bowl performance, considered one of the better or one of the best Star-Spangled Banner performances of all time, I believe. And these are all the words of the Star-Spangled Banner, actually all four verses. So if you want, you can follow along, and I encourage you to read this and try to really read all four parts. There's some really beautiful ideas here that maybe we don't always think about when we think about the song. So go ahead and check this out on your own. Pause the video and listen to Whitney Houston's performance of the Star-Spangled Banner. And you're going to go back and, just so you know, on question number 5, refer back to that performance, but most of the information about this particular question will be on slide 17. Now, we're looking actually at question 4 now. Took a little bit of a break from the homework questions to now talk about the German national anthem. So let's begin with Song of the Germans. And this map is interesting. It shows the German border at the unification of Germany in 1871, and you can see how wide-reaching it actually is. Much of what was once Eastern Germany is actually now Poland, so this area is no longer in modern-day Germany. Here we go. While the Star-Spangled Banner traced a long path to its status as national anthem, the process was fairly straightforward. The same cannot be said of many other countries. The current national anthem of Germany is titled "The Song of the Germans," which is in German "Das Lied der Deutschen." However, it was not the first national anthem, and it has not been in continuous use. Its history offers an excellent example of how transformations in the identity, contents, and use of an anthem can reflect the complex political journey of an individual nation. So there's the question. Part of question number 4 is asking about that quote that underlined here. Although it traces its history back for many centuries, the modern nation of Germany came into existence in 1871. By this time, it was typical for European nations to adopt national anthems, and the Germans were certainly not to be excluded from this practice. At first, they adopted the Prussian national anthem. They did so to symbolize the unification of previously independent Prussian principalities under a single nation. The title of the anthem was "Hail to Thee in the Victor's Crown," and it featured the return "Hail to Thee, Emperor." The melody, however, was that to which "God Save the Queen" is currently sung, a sign of the close ties between European monarchies. So we can see here that the original Prussian national anthem that was adopted into Germany was actually sung to the same melody as the British national anthem, "God Save the Queen." World War I, in which Germany was defeated, prompted major political reorganization. The emperor abdicated in 1918 and was replaced by a constitutional government known as the Weimar Republic. The new government required a new anthem, but the song selected for the role was in fact very old. The words to the Song of the Germans were written in 1841 by August Heinrich Hoffmann von Fallersleben, a Prussian academic. The text was initially subversive. Fallersleben lived and worked in a monarchy, but his song called for the unification of the German-speaking lands under democratic rule. During his own time, this was a dangerous message, and Fallersleben was dismissed from his post after promoting it. Following the unification of Germany, however, the call became patriotic, and Fallersleben's song was created. Like Francis Scott Key, Fallersleben wrote his text to fit a pre-existing melody. Because he was making a political plea, he selected a political tune, the national anthem of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which carried a text entitled "God Save Emperor Francis." By rewriting this important anthem, Fallersleben sought to rewrite political reality. The tune, incidentally, had been composed in 1797 by one of the most important of all Austrian composers, Franz Joseph Haydn. It would continue to serve as the national anthem of Austria, although many different texts to suit changes in government until World War II. So we already learned about Franz Joseph Haydn in the previous lecture. World War II also brought changes to Germany, which divided at the close of the war into East Germany and West Germany. The government of East Germany commissioned an entirely new anthem entitled "Risen from the Ruins," while West Germany ceased to use an anthem altogether. Although unusual, it is not difficult to explain this development. Anthems tend to represent patriotic feelings and pride in one's country, sentiments that seemed inappropriate in a post-Holocaust Germany. Various songs, including Ludwig van Beethoven's Ode to Joy, now the anthem of the European Union, were used to mark state occasions in West Germany, but the Song of the Germans was not officially readopted until 1952. So here you can listen to Ode to Joy, which is now the European the European Union anthem, but you can also know that this was at one point used for West Germany when they did not have their own anthem, that they did not adopt one. Although East Germany did have one called "Risen from the Ruins." And here we also see the original manuscript from Fallersleben, which has the poetry for the Song of the Germans. When it did enter back into use, it was accompanied by significant conflict over the text. So they're going back to this original Song of the Germans, but modifying it. The first stanza in particular had become controversial. It opens with the line, "Germany, Germany above all in the world." To Fallersleben, this meant that the promise of a united German nation must be held above the petty interests of minor German monarchs. To the Nazis, however, It was a call for Germany to take over the world. The second verse, which celebrates German women, wine, and song, perhaps lacks the dignity required of an anthem. After the war, therefore, the third verse was favored, and they adopted this: Unity in justice and freedom for the German fatherland. Towards these let us all strive brotherly with heart and hand. Unity and justice and freedom are the safeguards of fortune. Flourish in the radiance of this fortune. Flourish, German fatherland. Controversy over the words, however, has come to stand in for larger political battles. In this way, the Song of the Germans simultaneously unites and divides the country while embodying its difficult past. To consider the Song of the Germans in use, we will look at a performance that is, in most respects, very similar to Houston's rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner. This performance also took place at a major sporting event, a match between two teams in the National German Soccer League. The anthem was again sung by a popular performer, Namika, who was born Hanan Hamdi to Moroccan immigrant parents, is a well-known singer and rapper who has landed several hits since 2015. Like Houston, she performs the anthem in her own individual style. She introduces melodic ornaments but makes a conscious effort not to distract from the dignity of the text. And finally, the orchestration of the accompaniment is remarkably similar, for Namika is also backed by the militaristic combination of brass and snare drums, and her rendition is likely punctuated by trumpet fanfares. There is, however, one very significant difference. Namika is joined by the fans, whose voices can clearly be heard throughout the performance. While Houston was admired as a soloist, Namika is leading a sing-along. Why this difference? It is certainly not the case that Germans are more patriotic or musical. The German anthem, however, is considerably more singable than the Star-Spangled Banner, given that it outlines a range of only an octave, that the melody is largely conjunct, containing few large melodic leaps. The Song of the Germans can be sung by an untrained musician. It is likely that these musical differences have contributed to contrasting cultural traditions. Germans join in, while Americans leave anthem singing up to the professionals. So this is really the core of question number 5, is what are the differences between these two songs? I mentioned some great details that contrasted to what we read about Houston in our national anthem, that specifically the song itself, this song is very easy to sing. It has mostly a smaller range. It moves just by step, what we call conjunct motion, without very many big leaps in the melody, whereas the national anthem has these many leaps and therefore is harder to sing just by nature of its composition. So that's some detail there for question 5. But again, listen to Namika performing Song of the Germans, and you will be able to compare that to Whitney Houston's Star-Spangled Banner performance. Now we're moving into question number 6 now, jumping into a new country and their national anthem, in this case South Africa. The story of the national anthem of South Africa is equally tortuous, although the narrative details and the resulting anthem reflect a different type of national strife. While Germany came into conflict with the world, the South African conflict was entirely internal, unfolding as a white ruling minority sought to disenfranchise the non-white majority. This conflict and its resolutions were captured in a trio of official and unofficial anthems. The roots of modern South Africa are to be found in the 17th century, when Dutch colonists first settled on its shores. The descendants of these colonies, who both displaced and intermingled with the native Africans, speak a language known as Afrikaans, that combines elements of Dutch and indigenous languages. In the early 19th century, British colonists displaced the Dutch, and South Africa became a part of the British Empire in this way. The descendants of these colonies, who both displaced and intermingled with the native Africans, speak a language known as Afrikaans that combines elements of Dutch and indigenous languages. In the early 19th century, British colonists displaced the Dutch, and South Africa became a part of the British Empire. In this way, English became an important language, and it has continued to be widely spoken even since South Africa gained independence in 1931. In total, 11 official languages are spoken in South Africa: Afrikaans, English, and 9 indigenous African languages. This, of course, creates problems for the selection of national anthem. The language of the anthem will naturally reinforce the power and the prestige of the citizens who speak that language, while symbolically excluding those who speak other languages. Language, therefore, plays an important role in the history of South Africa's national anthems, and in that of other polyglot nations. Polyglot is a term for many languages. The political parties that came to power upon South Africa's independence from Great Britain represented the interests of the Afrikaner and English-speaking minorities. A decade of increasing tension between ethnic groups culminated in the 1940 election of the National Party, an Afrikaner ethnic nationalist party that instituted the policy of apartheid, the Afrikaans word for separateness. Apartheid was a form of white supremacist segregation whereby every South African citizen was legally classified as white, black, colored, or Indian. A citizen's racial classification then determined where they were allowed to live and what jobs they were allowed to hold. Public spaces were segregated, with preferences given to white South Africans, and non-whites had limited power to vote. In addition, interracial marriages and sexual relationships were prohibited. So this was essentially a government-backed segregation based off of skin color and national origin in South Africa. So this is related now to question 6. Just asking first, what is apartheid? And then we're going to get into how does this policy relate to the selection of the national anthem of South Africa, which the first one that we'll look at is the Call of South Africa. And we even see the sheet music for it right here. The National Party also adopted a new national anthem. South Africa had been using God Save the King or Queen, a legacy of its colonial status, but a political desire to distance British influence resulted in the 1957 designation of the Call of South Africa, which in Afrikaans is Die Stem van Suid-Afrika, as the national anthem. The text to the Call of South Africa was a 1918 Afrikaans poem by C.J. Langenhoven. The musical setting was created 3 years later by Martinus Loren de Vere. The poem reflects an Afrikaner perspective, and it celebrates ownership of the South African land, which was taken from the native inhabitants by colonizing forces. As a result, the Call of South Africa was and continues to be deeply offensive to many black South Africans. At the same time that the Call of South Africa was gaining popularity among Afrikaners, black South Africans were coalescing around an alternative anthem, Lord Bless Africa, which in Xhosa is Nkosi Sikelel' iAfrika, began life as a Methodist hymn. The tune, first verse, and chorus were composed in 1897 by Enoch Mainaki Sontaga, a teacher at a mission school. Sontaga, who was of Xhosa descent, was influenced by the British hymn tradition, and he described Lord Bless Africa as a combination of European four-part harmony with a repetitive African-style melody. It quickly gained popularity among church congregations, and in 1912 was adopted by the South African Native National Congress, a political party that advocated the rights of black South Africans. In 1827, Lord Bless Africa was published in an expanded version that included 7 additional Xhosa languages verses by Samuel McKay. During apartheid, the hymn, which was banned by the Nationalist Party, became a symbol for resistance to the racist policies of government. Many considered it to be the true national anthem. So here we see a song that became popular amongst the black South Africans and actually was a Methodist hymn. So they are borrowing from the European music, but really this was all black churches too. I should also note that this ethnic group here, the Xhosa, I can't make this sound properly, but in the language of these people, the XH sound is actually this kind of click sound that you make with your tongue that I think a lot of people cannot make unless you grew up learning how to say it as a child. So this is a very beautiful song, Lord Bless Africa, Nikoso Sikilele I Africa. The video, one version is right here with the American singer Paul Simon performing alongside a group called Ladysmith Black Mambazo, who's an incredible South African band. So I encourage you to check out this version of Lord Bless Africa, Nikoso Sikilele I Africa. Apartheid officially came to an end with the 1992 referendum, and the first open elections of the post-apartheid era, which took place in 1994, put the previously banned African National Party into power. Nelson Mandela, who had long played a leading role in negotiating the end of apartheid, became president. Mandela had been imprisoned by the National Party for his anti-government activities from 1964 until 1990. As president, however, he was committed to the principles of reconciliation and equality. For this reason, he declared that the Call of South Africa and Lord Bless Africa would both hold the status of national anthem, and for several years, both songs were performed at state and sporting events. Although symbolically significant, having dual anthems was logistically difficult. The combined performance took about 5 minutes, and the question about performance order was politically charged. In addition, the two languages represented by the anthems fell significantly short of reflecting the linguistic diversity of the South African populace. So this is getting into question number 7, talking about the end of apartheid and Nelson Mandela becoming president of South Africa. In what ways was it problematic to have two national anthems? So one is just the logistics of it. Having two took a long time. Imagine hearing this at the Olympics and having such a long national anthem because you really had to play two different songs. You also have the question about which one is going to be performed first. That one might seem maybe more important just by the ordering. And the last thing is that even with these two songs, they did not feel that the two songs even were representing all of the many ethnic groups and languages that are spoke in the country of South Africa. Let's continue here. In 1997, therefore, Mandela commissioned a new anthem. He required that it combine the two existing anthems, contain verses in a variety of languages, expunge controversial references to colonialism, and emphasize national unity. He also insisted that it no longer be no longer than 1 minute and 48 seconds in length. The resulting national anthem of South Africa is in two parts, the first taken from Lord Bless Africa, and the second from The Call of South Africa. It includes two verses from Lord Bless Africa. The first half of the first verse is in Xhosa, while the second half is in Zulu. The second verse is in Sethosa. At this point, the anthem modulates into a new key, and we hear the first 4 lines of the call sung in Afrikaans to the original melody. The final lines of the anthem, which are in English, contain a new text calling for the people of South Africa to come together in order to live and strive for freedom. This is the second part of question number 7 that asks, what was the South Africa and basically Nelson Mandela's answer to the question of what should their anthem be? So that is part of question 8. What decisions were made to create the new South African anthem. This continues talking about this and actually shows an example atop right here. Our rendition comes from the Nudlovo Youth Choir. This ensemble was founded in 2009 as an after-school program for impoverished children in the rural village of Mutse. The goal of the organizers was to provide these young people with the same quality of music education that was available to affluent youth, and thereby give them a means with which to express themselves and find a meaningful path in life. In 2019, the choir won international fame by advancing to the final round of America's Got Talent. Many performances of National Anthem of South Africa feature a vocal soloist singing in a popular style and an orchestral accompaniment including brass and percussion. That is to say, they are stylistically identical to the anthem performances we have already examined in this chapter. The Ndlovu Youth Choir, however, developed a unique arrangement of National Anthem of South Africa that exhibits various indigenous singing styles. National Anthem of South Africa is certainly unusual. It contains 2 unrelated melodies in different keys and verses in 5 languages. All that's the same, it reflects the diversity of the nation and speaks to a troubled past. It provides a musical representation of a nation that has been fractured and reunited. So I think these are all really well spoken and well written ways of describing how the new song is unique, but how it actually reflects the unique history, even though it does have its conflict, it actually is represented through the song, the diversity that is key to that country's identity. And again, you can watch this video from the youth choir. They do an exceptional job of singing the South African national anthem. Okay, we're moving on to question number 9 and talking about our next national anthem from Israel, Hatkiva, which means the hope in Hebrew. One additional national anthem will provide an opportunity to consider the connection between music and nation. This time, our analysis will reveal little about the complex history of the nation, as was the case with the Song of the Germans and National Anthem of South Africa. Instead, it will shed further light on the difficulty of assigning national identity to a melody. The national anthem of Israel, entitled The Hope, which in Hebrew is Hatkiva, has a brief and uncomplicated history. It was immediately adopted on an official basis when the nation of Israel was founded in 1948, and it became the official national anthem in 2004. The text was written in 1878 by the Polish poet Naftali Herz Imber, and it expresses yearning for a return to the Jewish homeland. The Hope was used in an anthem by several Zionist groups, and beginning in 1897, it was sung at the Congress of the World Zionist Organization, which advocated for the founding of an autonomous Jewish nation. As such, it came to represent Zionist sentiment throughout the Jewish diaspora. So Zionism is the belief in freedom for the Jewish people and a homeland for the Jewish people. So we're getting into question number 9 here, the significance of this song. The deep significance that the Hope had for Jewish people is evidenced by several stories from WW2 era concentration camps. In one recorded incident, a group of Czech Jews sang The Hope as they were escorted into the gas chamber at Auschwitz. The guards were enraged and beat them, but could not stop the singing. Reports from other camps indicated that the song was sung frequently by Jewish prisoners and that it brought them some solace. When Bergen-Belsen was liberated, the inmates also sang The Hope, a recording of which was captured and broadcast to the world. So this video here is very powerful to watch. I encourage you to watch it, even though it is devastating to hear. But these were prisoners of the Holocaust who were still singing The Hope after being emaciated tortured, dehumanized for years, and they still are singing this song as the camp that they were being held in was liberated during World War II. So a very, very powerful performance here. Very sad. The melody to which Imber's text has always been sung was provided by Samuel Cohen in 1888. He did not compose it, but rather adapted it from a melody he had heard sung in Romania. The tune, however, is not Romanian. In fact, it can be traced to a 16th century Italian song entitled La Mantovana, which has been attributed to the singer Giuseppe Cenci, which was first published around 1600. The melody quickly became popular and soon had been paired with texts in Dutch, Polish, Ukrainian, Romanian, and English. So you'll hear the national anthem. This recording is, as devastating it is, it's hard to hear maybe the true melody of the song due to the state of the prisoners. But this one here is more polished and done for a national display of Israel. So I encourage you to watch both of these videos and then just know that the unique history here, that this song was originally an Italian song that was then heard in Romania, that then becomes the Israeli and the Jewish people's song. Most famously, the same melody was used by the Czech composer Bedrich Smetana as the main theme for his nationalist symphonic poem, the Moldau, which belongs to a larger cycle of works entitled My Homeland, where we begin to see the complexities surrounding the hope. Decades before this tune came to communicate Jewish identity, and more than half a century before it would represent the nation of Israel, it was used to signify Czech identity and national sentiment. Smetana's The Moldau is an example of program music. It describes in sound the course of the famous Moldau River as it winds its way through the countryside and ultimately joins the Elbe River. The Moldau contains a succession of distinct selections. First, we hear the river emerge from a pair of warm and cold springs. It slowly gains strength until a mighty expressive melody that used for the hope bursts forth to represent the river. Next, we hear the sounds of dance music as it might be played at a country wedding, followed by a nocturnal passage representing mermaids in the moonlight. Finally, the river theme returns, first in its original minor mode, and then in a triumphant major. So this relates to question number 10, talking about what was Smetana's aim in writing this piece, the Moldau. One, you can say that it was a way of representing Czech national identity, but two, it shows as a form of program music the Moldau River, which is a river that winds all the way through the Czech Republic and actually all throughout Europe, through much of Central Europe here. What I love about this piece is it's almost as if you're traveling down the river. So how does it connect to program music? It's almost embodying the river for one, but two, we hear these several scenes. We hear one, the river itself. We hear the dance music of a wedding on a different part of the river. We also hear a nocturnal passage for the mermaids, and then returning to the original theme of the river. So it's a very, very beautiful piece and a very recognizable melody. It's used for many things and even used, as we saw, for the Israeli national anthem as well. So here's the questions. How can an Italian melody develop and sustain both Jewish and Czech nationalist connotations, all while continuing to be periodically mistaken for a Flemish, Polish, Ukrainian, Romanian, and Scottish folk song? The answer has to do with musical style and with the power of association. La Mantovana is an exceptionally simple tune. It contains two parts, one lower and one higher, a typical characteristic in many folk traditions. Both parts have a limited range, and both primarily use stepwise motion. All these attributes allow La Mantovana to be adapted in conformance with the conventions of various national styles. However, association is more powerful than style. Listeners who first encounter this melody as it representing the Moldau River in Czech identity will have a hard time hearing it in a different way. It has a similarly powerful, although quite different meaning for Jews who grew up singing the Zionist lyrics. The multiple identities of the tune have created consternation in the Jewish community, and many have objected to its pairing with Imber's text. All the same, efforts to find or create a new musical setting have always met with failure, and this melody continues to exercise enormous emotional power over a global population. So here we see depictions of the Moldau River, these two rivers that meet together and become one, in a scene from the Czech Republic here. So this is a great recording of the Moldau, again, a piece of program music, a term that we've already covered, a instrumental piece of music that depicts or tells a story or represents something metaphorically just through music with no lyrics. So in this case, we're going to hear the sounds of the river, but also the sound of the places that the river passes, these different scenes. So you can see here the form of the piece, and I encourage you to listen to the whole thing. It's a great piece of music, the Moldau. And we're jumping into our next section here, coming into question 11, 12, and 13 as well. So let's look at national representation in Western art music. This will actually go all the way to question 14. As we have already seen, anthems are only the most obvious and explicit example of national representation in music. But there are many ways in which music can come to stand for a nation. Sometimes composers or performers set out to capture national character and sound. They seek to develop an individual work or a broader style that is uniquely tied to their national identity. Other times, those in power identify and promote music that is determined to represent the nation. In such cases, the music is not created with a nationalistic intent, but rather repurposed. Finally, we might differentiate between musical representations created by the people who belong to nations or ethnic groups versus those created by outsiders. We are not talking here about exoticism, wherein an artist represents an ethnic group for the purpose of voyeuristic entertainment, but rather contributions to national style made from a foreign perspective. We will begin by looking at two compositions for piano, each created by Hungarian composers who sought to express his national identity in music. Both composers turned to Hungarian folk music for inspiration, but they disagreed about which Hungarian folk music best represented Hungarian identity. This type of disagreement has larger implications about who counts as a citizen and whose culture can be understood to represent the nation. It is important to note that the political nation of Hungary did not exist when either of these pieces were composed. Instead, Hungary was ruled by German-speaking monarchs, first as a territory to the Austrian Empire and then as subservient partner in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Modern Hungary first gained independence upon the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire following World War I. Throughout the 19th century, however, Hungarians sought greater autonomy by means of political protests and armed revolt. Efforts to represent Hungarian identity in the arts were part of a larger nationalist movement that had ties to the quest for independence. So we're going to look at two different Hungarian composers. First, on the left here, Franz Lizst, and then Bela Bartok. And again, we see, just as a basic idea, the idea that the Hungarians were ruled by the German-speaking people, but really they had a feeling that they were their own people, and that's why eventually they do split up and become their own country. But with this, the role for defining their national identity, music was a very powerful tool in doing this. Franz Liszt is an unusual candidate for most famous Hungarian composer, although he certainly merits the title. To begin with, he did not speak Hungarian, although the village of Dvořák, in which Liszt was born, was located in the Kingdom of Hungary. The inhabitants spoke German. Furthermore, Liszt lives in Hungary for only the first decade of his life. He demonstrated great musical talent as a child, so his parents took him to Vienna at the age of 11 to cultivate his gifts. He returned only on concert tours. All the same, Liszt was proud of his Hungarian heritage and expressed it frequently in his compositions for piano. Liszt's extraordinary career set new standards for piano playing and public performance. After a successful Viennese debut in 1822, he completed his education and embarked on what might have been a typical career of teaching, composing, and performing. In 1832, however, he happened to attend a recital in Paris by the Italian violin virtuoso Niccolò Paganini. Liszt was astonished by Paganini's extraordinary technique, and he committed to becoming Paganini's equal at the piano. To this end, Liszt gave up concertizing and went into seclusion to refine his technique. So this is question 11, is who was Franz Liszt and what was his reputation as a performer and composer? We haven't quite gotten there yet. We do see a little hint about his extraordinary career at the piano, playing these public performances as a piano soloist. And we definitely see some information here about the influence of the violin virtuoso Paganini, who played exceptionally fast. I'll post a video for this, but who inspires Liszt to become equally as talented and skillful on the piano. We'll see more about Franz Liszt on the next slide and his unique talents and reputation as a performer and composer. When Liszt returned to the stage in 1838, he was indeed heralded as the greatest living pianist. He embarked on a decade-long tour of Europe through which he established a reputation for flamboyant and thrilling performances. So these were very exciting live piano recitals. It was Liszt's practice to appear on stage with two pianos, for he played with such force that he would break strings and need to change instruments. Before Liszt, solo recitals were practically unheard of. Audiences preferred variety, and it was considered foolish to imagine that anyone could attend a concert with only one performer. Liszt, however, provided his own variety, combining piano transcription of symphonies with improvisations, classics by the great composers of the past, and showy new compositions by himself. Liszt also possessed a great deal of sex appeal. He was particularly popular with society ladies, who went into hysterics at his concerts and fought over his discarded items. Due to his enormous success, Liszt became the first performing artist to require a manager. So here we see an engraving from 1842 of Liszt giving a solo piano recital, and his audience, who looks to be almost all entirely women, are blowing him kisses, throwing flowers, and fainting in ecstasy because he was just that smooth and considered quite attractive, and his skill at the piano was certainly part of his great appeal and excitement at this time, and great music too. Liszt composed piano music in a variety of genres. His fantasies explored operatic themes written by other composers, while his etudes showcased specific piano techniques. He also produced 19 Hungarian rhapsodies, each of which was inspired by the Romanian music that Liszt heard as a child. Liszt was not the first composer to write Hungarian music, which had been in fashion for decades. However, his Hungarian compositions were more personal than those of German composers, who used Hungarian musical elements to flavor their works. Liszt made it clear that his music was a personal statement that reflected his national identity. We will examine Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, which is certainly his best-known effort in the genre. In it, Lizst uses the scales, rhythms, and forms of Hungarian music as a vehicle for dazzling piano technique. A good performance of Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 is entertaining and astonishing. Before looking at Liszt's composition, however, we need to know something about the Romani folk music on which the piece is based. So here we see Liszt, much older in life, in 1886, so he was actually lived long enough to see the advent of the camera. Now we've already seen that he was inspired by Romani music, so now we're going to learn about Verbunkos. So this is question 12. What is Verbunkos music? Liszt was influenced by a style of dance music known as Verbunkos that he associated with the itinerant Romani musicians of his childhood home. The Romani, known colloquially as gypsies, live across Europe, although they are often excluded from mainstream society and actively persecuted. In the village where Liszt grew up, Romani musicians played Verbunkos music in cafes as entertainment for the upper classes. Their traditional instruments included violin and cymbalum, a type of hammered dulcimer. Although Verbunkos music is unique to Hungary, therefore, it is closely associated with the Romani people, who are not ethnic Hungarians. So here we see the instrument that was being described, the cymbalum, which is a type of dulcimer. You can think of it as a hammered, flat-laying harp with rows of strings struck by these tiny hammers. And the violin, of course, which is often associated with gypsy culture or Romani culture, which was a great instrument. All these are small enough to be portable by people that didn't really have a homeland and who oftentimes were moving quite a bit. So even though these people are not Hungarian, the music of Verbunkos was played at cafes as entertainment for the upper class Hungarian people. So it does have this association with the culture, even though it comes from the non-mainstream parts of society. So very interesting. Here's the second part of question number 12, talking about more about Verbunkos music, and specifically, what are the sections known as Lasan and Friska, and what are the characteristics overall of this music? Verbunkos music has a variety of distinctive characteristics. To begin with, it is divided into two sections, an opening Lasan and a concluding Friska. The Lasan is slow and melancholic, featuring dramatic harmonic shifts. It lacks a pulse and has an improvisatory feel. So there you go, there's all the information about the Lasan. The Friska, on the other hand, builds in volume and tempo, becoming increasingly exciting as it approaches a conclusion. So that's kind of a big finale. This reminds me a little bit of the Ottoman music too, funnily enough. The harmonies are simple, alternating between the tonic and dominant chords. So these are kind of the building blocks of harmony, just having the tonic, the home key, and then also the dominant, which is a fifth higher and wants to resolve back to the tonic. So this is a very kind of back and forth, simple harmonic progression, but is very effective and very exciting too. Verbunkos music also employs different scales than European concert music. While 19th century composers of art music used only the major and minor scales, Romani musicians used various scales, mostly related to minor, that featured raised or lowered pitches and as a result contained augmented intervals. That is to say, intervals greater than a whole step, which is the largest possible distance between two notes in a major or minor scale. Such scales sounded exotic to Liszt's audience, as they still do to many Westerners today. So, similar to the Ottoman music that we heard about last week, these scales to have these raised intervals between them that make them sound a little bit wider melodically, that gives it a very interesting flavor to our ears and very beautiful to listen to as well. Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 exhibits the influence of Verbunkos dance music in a variety of ways. To begin with, it takes the two-part form of a Lasan and Friska. The Lasan, which is exceptionally dramatic, features a march-like theme that is occasionally interrupted by unmetered flights of fancy. The music sounds as if it might be improvised, but in fact, Lizst wrote out every note. In addition to these rhythmic characteristics, Lizst occasionally introduces unusual scales that echo Romani practices. The Friska begins with a passage that is meant to imitate the sound of a Hungarian cymbalum. From there, Lizst finds his way to the major mode and provides a virtuosic conclusion. So really, he's modeling his piano piece, Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, exactly on the two parts of the Romani people, the Lasan and the Friska. And here we see again Franz Lizst featured a little bit younger. You can see maybe why he was so appealing to people with his cool hair. Okay, so we've come to the point of listening now. Take a little break from your writing. We've gone all the way through question 12, talking about Verbunkos music and the Lasan and Friska. So a good chance to now try to listen for these things. Imagine that you are hearing music inspired by the Romani people of Hungary, and in this case, this is Franz Liszt's impression of the music and his interpretation of a Lasan and Friska in his Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. These are some great listening notes here and a wonderful performance that you can listen to right here. So pause the video and check out this recording on the lecture slide. And we're going to see now, contesting the representation of Hungary, that even though we love Franz Liszt's Romanian, the Rhapsody No. 2, we're also going to see that, again, can one piece of music really stand for the whole nation of Hungary? So we're going to jump to Bela Bartok and see how, just being a decade or a little bit less later, how his interpretation of what counts as Hungarian is going to differ from Liszt's and maybe show a broader perspective, and kind of makes it his life work to showcase this music of unrepresented people in Hungary, in that region. So let's begin. By the time Bela Bartok was growing up in southern Hungary, Liszt was a national hero. Hungarians were proud of his monumental success across Europe and his influence on the elite musical establishment. They had also come to accept his musical representations of Hungarian identity, such as we observed in Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, as authentic and correct. As a music student, therefore, Bartók took Liszt as a model and sought to express his Hungarian identity using a similar musical language. In 1904, however, Bartók had an experience that changed his thinking about Hungarian identity should be represented in art music. While visiting a summer resort, he happened to hear a nanny sing folk songs from the region of Transylvania. It was unlike any music he had ever heard before, and was certainly far removed from the Verbunkos dance music of the urban cafes. He immediately set out to discover and document as much Eastern European folk music as he could find, becoming in the process one of the earliest ethnomusicologists, who was a scholar who specialized in indigenous musical traditions. So here we see a photograph of Bela Bartok taken in 1922, and just knowing that we're approaching the modern era, or maybe we already are in the modernist period of music history. So while Liszt was in the Romantic era and used that Romantic era to kind of give these dramatic versions of the Hungarian music, Bartok comes out again just a little bit later and is starting to look more broad at all the diversity of Eastern European music in the region that was Hungary. And this field of ethnomusicology is so important, but also has a complicated history about people who study these musics from these folk styles across the world. So that's what we're going to learn about here for question number 13. Who was Bela Bartok? We just learned a little bit about him. But what experience did he have which made him rethink Liszt's portrayal of Hungarian music? That was on the previous slide, talking about how he heard this music of the nanny in Transylvania and was so captivated by it and its unique character that it made him rethink uh, the kind of idea that Hungarian Rhapsody had to be the authentic representation of Verbunkos music, and that was the only way of representing Hungary. So the second part of this question is talking about his work with another composer and ethnomusicologist who is Zoltán Kodály, who actually has a field of music education named after him too, the Kodály method. So what did the two composers and ethnomusicologists do together? Bartok found a like-minded and fellow composer, Zoltán Kodály, with whom he traveled the countryside recording the music of rural singers and instrumentalists. So this is question 13. They sometimes used a primitive recording device that captured sound by carving grooves into a wax cylinder, but they also wrote down melodies using Western staff notation, and they transcribed song texts. In 1906, they published Hungarian Folk Songs, a collection of peasant folk songs with simple piano accompaniments. Their intent was to spread awareness about the existence of the music, which they valued highly. Following his studies, Bartok began to criticize Liszt's version of Hungarian musical identity. Verbunkos dance music, he argued, was not the real Hungarian folk music. His objection was less to the ethnic identity of the Romani people who performed it as to the commercial context in which Verbunkos music had developed and thrived. It flourished in the cities and was sponsored by the aristocracy as official Hungarian culture. True Hungarian folk music, argued Bartok, was to be found among the disenfranchised rural peasantry. So this is similar to what we saw with the ideas of von Herder and von Goethe with Schubert and this looking to folk music for inspiration of national identity. We've already seen these themes, but Bartok is starting to really look at this closely and do the work of not only writing and documenting this music as well. So here we see a representation, a picture of Bartok and Kodály, who are partners in their work to do this ethnomusicology work in 1905 here. And here we see Bartok recording the songs of Slovak peasants in 1908. So he was taking an interest in the songs of the everyday people across this region. So now we're moving on into question 14 in just a moment, but just some more information about Bartok and a big question here about who counts as Hungarian. Bartok was interested both in promoting the cause of Hungarian independence and developing his own unique voice as a composer. So not only is he an ethnomusicologist, but he's a composer as well. While he took genuine pride in the folk culture of Eastern Europe, he also saw it as a grist for his own creative mill. His omnivorous appetite for folk music attracted some criticism from Hungarian nationalists. They were pleased when he promoted Hungarian folk music, but less supportive when he strayed beyond the bounds of the ethnic Hungarian population. Again, however, we must ask, who counts as Hungarian? This is not a question of literal citizenship, but a question of belonging. Which ethnic groups are to have their cultural products privileged as representing the nation? The borders of the Austro-Hungarian Empire extended far beyond those of modern Hungary, encompassing a variety of ethnic groups and spoken languages. Bartok was not interested in deciding who counted as Hungarian. His mission was to collect and popularize as broad a selection of folk music as possible, and to integrate that music into his own compositions. To see one of Bartok's compositional techniques in action, we'll take a look at his Romanian folk dances from Hungary. It features tunes that he collected from the region of Transylvania, which was a part of Hungary for the first 2 decades of the 20th century. Bartok shortened the title to Romanian folk dances when Romania annexed the region following World War I. Like Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, this is a piece for solo piano based on Hungarian folk music. The similarities end there, however, for the purpose behind Bartok's composition was completely different. Romanian folk dances contain 6 independent movements. They are entitled Dragulubata, stick dance, Braul, sash dance, Pelok, in one spot, Ucimayana, dance from Buxum, Huraga Romanesca, Romanian polka, and Maruntal fast dance. The melody of each movement is taken from a Transylvanian fiddle tune. Bartok did not alter the melodies, transcribing them as he had heard them. He then supplied an original accompaniment, which is usually heard in the left hand of the piano. Bartok described this approach as similar to crafting a piece of jewelry in order to show off a beautiful gem. His musical setting were supposed to exhibit the inherent beauty and interest of the folk tunes. All the same, his unusual harmonies are what made these pieces enjoyable and interesting for most listeners. So here we see a representation of Bela Bartok's music, which again is very accurate. He tried to be as accurate as possible to the original source material of folk music that he was referring to or recording. The left hand is where he gets creative with the accompaniment, but it usually is there to just showcase the true uh, depiction of the melody that is as accurate as he can get to the original recordings that he made or documentations that he made. So please check out that video there. Because Bartok was unwilling to make changes to the borrowed folk tunes, each movement is short and simple in terms of form. So these are some other unique things that make him different from Lizst. Although only the second movement repeats literally in its entirety, all of the movements contain some melodic repetition. As in the Lizst example, we hear unusual scales and rhythms, which Bartok derived from the folk music he studied. Bartok, however, was not a virtuoso pianist, and he was not writing music for the purpose of popular entertainment. His emphasis was on fidelity to his source material, not show. So again, differences in the composer. Lizst was this very virtuosic piano player and therefore could write music that was incredibly difficult for the piano because he knew he'd be the one playing it. For Bartok, he is more concerned about being accurate to the original folk music and writing music to make it accessible and to get the music to be known by more people. There are, of course, other reasons for which the music of Lizst and Bartok sound quite different. Lizst was composing at the height of the Romantic era, when music was expected to be highly expressive while also adhering to certain rules about the use of harmony. Bartok, writing in the early 20th century, was a modernist. He sought to break new ground by replacing common practice tonality, the typical chord progressions we are familiar with from most Western music, with a new harmonic language of his own invention. Bartok's Romanian folk dances is an early example of his experimental work. And so I provided that video here too. This is Bartok's Romanian folk dances, which shows more of his experimental side, where you can see the influence of the folk music, but he's also taking it to places of his own imagination and interpolation. Okay, we're coming to our next section, which is on contesting the representation of Western art music in the United States. So when we see an American symphony, what is the expectation of what it should sound like? Should it sound like a new entity because it's a new country, or should it be rooted in the European tradition firmly? So we're going to look at two examples that contrast these ideas and some basis for how do you even represent the United States through sound. So first, we're going to look at Antonín Dvořák, who was born in the Czech Republic but actually lived in the United States, and then also Amy Beach, who is an American born but came from the immigrants of the British Isles. So let's begin. Throughout the Romantic era of the 19th century, Europeans considered the United States to be a cultural backwater. Americans, of course, were preoccupied not with artistic innovation, but with expanding and stabilizing their nation. They're saying America hasn't created anything musically or culturally relevant, according to the Europeans at this time. We're more concerned with industrializing and taking over this huge patch of land that we occupy. Those who did pursue the arts were expected to receive their training in Europe and to imitate European models. In the late 19th century, however, American composers became increasingly interested in developing a unique national voice. So again, at this point, they had no other choice or no other thought other than to imitate what had already been done by their forefathers or by other European people when it came to classical music. But we are going to see the development of an American voice eventually with these two individuals. Excuse me. None of this is to say that there was no distinctively American music in the 19th century. There certainly was, much of which is explored elsewhere in this volume. Hymn composers in New England and the South had already developed several new strains of church music, while diverse folk traditions flourished in rural areas. In addition, there were the rich musical traditions of Native Americans, who faced eradication on a national scale, and African Americans, whose influence was first felt in the sphere of popular and dance music. However, none of this mattered to members of the arts establishment. They valued European-style concert music and sought a way to express American identity in that context. So at this time, again, we're still in the Romantic era. Even though there are these folk traditions, no one had really thought to incorporate them into their music at a certain point. They were more focused on continuing in the style of European art music. So now we're going to start learning about this idea of creating an American musical identity. Antonín Dvořák was a prime candidate for teaching Americans how to express national identity in music, for he had first made a name for himself by doing the same for the Czech musical establishment, so the country of Czechoslovakia or the Czech Republic. His first successful composition was a series of orchestral pieces ostensibly based on Slavic dances. For Dvořák, however, his national identity was a source of frustration. He struggled to be accepted not as a Czech composer, but as a good composer. So he gets kind of caught up in creating this Czech or Slavic national identity through music, but because of that, he kind of gets pigeonholed a little bit, perhaps, into thinking that that is the only thing that he is able to do, even though he was a great composer all around. When Dvořák came to New York City in 1891, he was at the height of his career. He had been invited to serve as the first director of the National Conservatory of Music in America, which was to train American musicians in the European concert tradition. He was also expected to contribute to the development of American concert music. So here he's assigned with this task. He becomes the director of a national music school, the Conservatory of Music, and his job is essentially to train American musicians how to play European classical music. He's also expected to contribute to American concert music, this new idea of national identity in this concert setting. Dvořák produced two monumental American works during his stay in the United States, both of which were premiered in 1893. One was his string quartet number 12, known as the American Quartet, a work composed, ironically, during his visit to a Czech community in the Midwest. So he writes this one piece, which we won't get into much, but string quartet number 12, called the American Quartet or the American String Quartet, which he wrote in America, but he was actually visiting a Czech community in the Midwest. So he is still even drawing back to his Czech roots in some ways. The other was his Symphony number 9 from the New World. This symphony in particular exemplifies Dvořák ideas about what was American in music. So the New World Symphony, sometimes we call it too. Dvořák was regularly asked for his views on this subject, and in 1895 he published an article entitled Music in America that contained his advice to American composers wishing to develop a national style. He recommended, unsurprisingly, that they draw inspiration from folk music, specifically that of African American and Native Americans. Dvořák, of course, knew very little about American folk traditions. He was completely ignorant of folk music in most parts of the country, while his ideas about Native American music was more fantasy than fact. His observation that Native American and African American musics were practically identical betrays his shallow thinking on the subject. The one thing Dvořák really did know something about was African American spirituals. He encountered this repertoire through Harry Burleigh, who was a student at the National Conservatory of Music during the time that Dvořák served as director. Burley had learned to sing spirituals from his grandfather, who had been born a slave but had purchased his freedom in the 1830s, and he later gained international fame both for his concert arrangements of spirituals and for his original art songs. At Dvořák's request, Burley frequently sang for him in his home. He reported that Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, apparently the composer's favorite item in his repertoire, was the basis for the theme in the first movement of Symphony No. 9. The second movement, which we will consider in detail, also features a spiritual-like theme. In fact, it was such a convincing fake that it was frequently mistaken for a genuine spiritual after a student of Dvořák's wrote a text for it titled "Goin' Home" in 1922. So maybe you've heard this before. Going home, I am going home. So this was actually the melody that Dvořák made that sounded very much like an African American spiritual, but really he wrote it with no words in mind. These words were added later to the text by a student of Dvořák, looks like many years after it was premiered. And here, of course, is the picture of Harry Burley taken in 1936. He was a student of Dvořák's at the National Conservatory, was a singer, and created all these unique arrangements of spirituals and other art songs as a singer and as a composer as well. Now, Dvořák's Symphony No. 9 also has a Native American connection, although it is romanticized and inauthentic. Dvořák, like most Europeans, was familiar with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's 1855 epic poem, The Song of Hiawatha, in which the poet provides a largely fictionalized account of the life of an Ojibwe warrior. So this is a book by an American, but is about Native American themes. So there are some discrepancies, of course. It's highly fictionalized, but became very popular. Hiawatha had been translated into Czech in 1870, and Dvořák was familiar with it before his visit to the United States. Although Symphony No. 9 is an example of absolute music, and should not be understood to communicate a specific coherent narrative, Dvořák told interviewers that the two internal movements were both influenced by Hiawatha, and that he intended the second movement as a sketch for a dramatic setting of the text, a project that he never in fact pursued. Although Dvořák offered few specifics, it has been argued that the two themes of the second movement, one which is gentle and romantic, the other distraught and funereal, portrays the wooing and the death of Hiawatha's bride, Minnehaha, whose name means laughing water, waterfall, or rapid water. So already we see that this term absolute music comes back to us. This is essentially the opposite of program music, which is designed to tell a specific story, represent a myth or a character sometimes. In this case, Symphony No. 9 is a piece of absolute music. It doesn't have a true story behind it. However, we are seeing that the two movements, the second and third of the four, are maybe have some inspiration from Dvořák's understanding of the Henry Wadsworth Longfellow poem, The Song of Hiawatha, these Native American themes. So here we're going to look at the two themes that appear in the second movement related to the wooing, so you could call this courting or, flirting maybe, falling in love, and also the death of the bride of the main character Hiawatha. Dvořák's Symphony No. 9 follows the standard four-movement pattern for a European symphony. So 4 movements in all European symphonies typically. 2 examples of which are examined in Chapter 7. We will take a look at the slow movement, which Dvořák placed second. This movement is in ternary form, A, B, A', with a brief introductory passage that also serves as the conclusion. The introduction consists of a series of 7 chords, played slowly by the brass section. The harmonies, which are unexpected and dramatic, seem to lift the curtain on a magical scene. The first section features Dvořák's spiritual-inspired theme. It is first played by the English horn, a double reed instrument that can be thought of as a low-pitched oboe. The theme itself is also in ternary form, A, B, A'. The A' section concludes with an accent in the melody that brings it to a satisfying close. The first statement of the theme is followed by a repetition of the introductory chords in the winds, the B section of the theme in the strings, and the conclusion of the theme in the English horn. So back to the English horn. The tempo throughout is extremely slow, marked largo by Dvořák, and the mood is peaceful. The middle section of the movement offers a marked change in mood, as Dvořák increases the tempo and switches from the major to the minor mode. So remember, we have these two themes. The first one is sweet and very beautiful, actually. It's maybe meant to sound like, again, trying to attract your partner, trying to flirt with someone in that act of falling in love. But the second movement now, or the second theme, excuse me, the tempo increases, the mode switches from major to minor, and we get this secondary theme, which is going to represent the death of the beloved. This section is primarily in rondo form. We've seen this before too. Again, round, a theme that keeps coming back to us, meaning that a principal theme alternates with secondary themes. So it's going to be the main theme, a new idea, back to the main theme, a new idea, and etc. The principal theme is agitated and mournful, featuring a repeated descending figure, while the secondary themes are accompanied by a steady bass line that could belong to a funeral march. After the final abbreviated statement of the principal theme, Dvořák inserts a major mode passage in which the winds and strings imitate birds. Dvořák frequently includes bird songs in his compositions, and his American quartet also features such imitations. In this case, the bird song can be directly related to the Hiawatha story, which includes the telling of a myth in which people are turned into birds. So this would be quite shocking. Obviously, maybe the wife, Minnehaha, is turned into a bird and therefore is no longer of this world. Next, Dvořák includes a reference to the first movement theme based on Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, overlaid with the spiritual-like theme from this movement. So he's combining the theme from movement 1 of the symphony with his own spiritual-like theme from movement 2. So he has his own music kind of set against Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. By stating the two themes simultaneously, Dvořák draws our attention to their similarity. Both, after all, reflect the same African-American influence. Dvořák is also continuing the practice of connecting the movements of a symphony, known as cyclical technique, that we first saw at work in Berlioz's Fantastical Symphony and Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. So we've already seen this idea that now, in the later part of the Romantic era especially, we see that linking a symphony to previous movements has become much more popular. Beethoven kind of starts this idea. We talked about organicism. This relates to cyclical techniques again. But Berlioz also does this with his idea fixe, the idea or the melody that runs throughout all parts of his Symphonie Fantastique. Dvořák is doing the same thing by connecting these two melodies to each other. The closing section contains the last statement of the spiritual theme, although this time the B passage is laced with pauses. These convey the impression that the singer of this wordless song is overcome with emotion, needing perhaps to sob or catch their breath. Finally, the opening chords are heard once more, the last of which is repeated and sustained. This movement in Symphony No. 9 as a whole can be taken as Dvořák putting his own advice to American composers into action. Those composers, however, did not necessarily appreciate his guidance. So again, his guidance is that Americans should be looking to Native American music and to African American music as the main influence for their music. It's the same way that we saw in Europe, people were looking to folk music for inspiration for their larger pieces of art music. So this relates again to question number 15 that asks about what was Dvořák's ideas for for American composers when creating their national style of music. So this is slides 44 through 47. We're coming on the end of this right here. So let's see, how did people react? These composers, however, did not necessarily appreciate his guidance. Their negative reactions were largely understandable. To begin with, The American arts establishment had already been grappling with the task of developing a unique national voice. That a foreigner would step in and tell them what to do was, to many, unpalatable. Composers also objected to Dvořák's specific advice. The music of Native Americans and African Americans, they argued, was not the music of all Americans. It represented only a small portion of the populace and could not stand in for the country as a whole. While certain individuals objected for racist reasons, mostly simply did not accept Dvořák's argument that a national style could be derived from these narrow sources. So I think, there are two sides of this. Should we be embracing the music of Native Americans and African Americans? I would say yes, absolutely. But at the same time, who is the one telling the story? If it's not going to be representative of themselves, then maybe it comes off as a little bit contrived or as a little bit of exoticism, or perhaps the idea that it doesn't really represent some people's view on themselves as Americans, so it can't be a stand-in for all things. And of course, we know that America is this beautiful melting pot, so there should be space for all these musics, but again, it has to be inclusive, not just narrowed down to two things. Now, that all being said, Dvořák Symphony No. 9 in E minor, this is the second movement, which has the very popular melody that I sang earlier for you. So listen to this. It is a very beautiful piece of music. And again, thinking of it maybe as not a true American representation, but this is the unique view of a Czech person living in America and how he views this new world of America as an outsider. So from that perspective, it is still an interesting listen to see what were people's views on America at this time before the 20th century, in the late 1800s, essentially, this was written. So please, I encourage you to listen to this very beautiful piece of music. Listen for the different themes that were mentioned in the previous slides, but also you can listen and watch for them here. So here's the movement 2 of the New World Symphony No. 9 by Dvořák. And if you enjoyed that, it is a very beautiful piece of music. I would encourage you to check out the whole thing. This makes for great study music, and you can actually listen for the cyclical techniques, listening how all 4 movements are connected. So again, not required for the homework assignment, but it is further listening if you are enjoying this world of music. Do it while you do your math homework, for example. Okay, we're jumping into question 16 now, a new approach to the American style, composer Amy Beach. So the question asks, how did composer Amy Beach's approach to creating American concert music differ from Dvořák's? Where did she get the inspiration for her music, and how did she express her culture through the second movement of her symphony in E minor? So here we are starting on slide 50. One of the many composers who rejected Dvořák's approach was Amy Beach, born 1867 to 1944. As we will see, Beach preferred to found an American style on the folk music of her ancestors, who hailed from the British Isles. Before examining her response to Dvořák's Symphony No. 9, however, we need to learn something about this extraordinary woman. Beach counts among the many composers who began their careers as child prodigies. Born into a well-to-do New Hampshire family, she demonstrated a thorough grasp of pitch before she could talk, and was harmonizing melodies at the age of 2. She composed her first piano music, a set of waltzes, at the age of 4, and was soon giving public piano recitals that attracted the attention of the press. When her family moved to Boston, to a Boston suburb in 1875, Beach was able to receive professional training in music, although she was to remain almost entirely self-taught as a composer. She would learn by analyzing newly published music from Europe and studying Berlioz's textbook on orchestration. So we've already seen Berlioz' Symphony Fantastique. He was a great orchestrator, and he wrote this book on how to use the orchestra, how to write to get the maximum potential out of the many instruments that are the symphony orchestra. And here's, of course, a picture of composer Amy Beach. Beach gave her debut performance with the Boston Symphony Orchestra at the age of 16, and might have gone on to become the great piano virtuoso of her era. Instead, at the age of 18, she married, Her husband, Dr. Henry Harris Aubrey Beach, was 24 years her senior, and in Beach's own words, old-fashioned. He believed that it was a man's honorable obligation to support his wife, and he was not willing to allow Beach to pursue a career performing or teaching piano. He supported her work as a composer, however, and did a great deal to promote her success. For the 25 years of their marriage, therefore, Beach committed herself to composition. She won accolades from both the press and her peers, and was warmly accepted into what has been termed the Second New England School of Composers. So already we see a similarity, even going back to Barbara Strozzi in the previous chapter, these stigmas about female musicians and female composers, that they were often not allowed to pursue their creative endeavors as wholeheartedly or without social stigma as their male counterparts. So it was great that she was able to commit herself as a composer because she wrote a ton of great music, but it is sad that she did not get to maybe reach her full potential as a career in playing the piano or teaching the piano. Beach first gained attention in 1892 with her Mass in E-flat, which was the first work by a woman ever to be performed by Boston's prestigious Handel and Haydn Society. Then, in 1896, the Boston Symphony Orchestra premiered her Gaelic Symphony, the first symphony to compose by an American woman. Although it is only fair to acknowledge Beach's role as a trailblazer, many now consider the Gaelic Symphony to be the first great American symphony, regardless of the composer's gender identity. Beach preferred not to write or speak about her experiences as a female composer in an era when women were discouraged from entering the field, and later stated only that she had met with no particular difficulty. In 1900, Beach appeared as a piano soloist with the Boston Symphony Orchestra in her piano concerto in C-sharp minor, a rare public performance during her married years. The extreme difficulty of the work attests to Beach's virtuosic abilities. So, huge figure here for American music. Not only was she the first American woman to write a symphony with her Gaelic Symphony, but she's also maybe considered to have the first ever great American symphony. There were others, but they did not compare in quality to her Gaelic Symphony. Upon her husband's death in 1910, Beach resumed her performance career. She toured Europe in the 1910s, where she was praised as a rare American composer whose work equaled that of Europeans in quality. Both her Gaelic Symphony and her piano concerto, again with the composer at the keyboard, herself playing it, were well received. Back in the United States, Beach continued to compose and perform while also developing music programs for children and mentoring younger composers. Beach, like all American composers active in the 1890s, was well aware of Dvořák's advice and intimately familiar with his Symphony No. 9. In 1893, she was one of a number of prominent composers interviewed by the Boston Herald on the topic of Dvořák's recent call for music, based on the melodies of African Americans. He would only later praise Native American influence. Each was asked what they thought about Dvořák's advice, and what they saw as the future of American concert music. Beach acknowledged that spirituals were beautiful and expressive, but she rejected them as the basics for an American style. Instead, as she put it, we of the North should be far more likely to be influenced by the old English, Scotch, or Irish songs heritage inherited with our literature from our ancestors. She agreed, it seems, with Dvořák's call to incorporate folk influences, but disagreed about which folk music embodied American identity, or at least her own identity. Beach's response indicates that while Southern composers might be differently influenced by their musical environment, the music of the plantations meant nothing to her. So that sums it up pretty well for question number 16, talking about her approach to music. She is incorporating folk music, but she is not looking to the music that is truly American, like African American music or Native American music, but she is looking to her own ancestors who immigrated from England, Ireland, and Scotland, and who brought music and literature with them. So that is now a part of the fabric of the United States as well. Now, This is where she puts it into practice, they say. Beach put her theory into practice with the Gaelic Symphony. So again, this refers to Ireland, the British Isles. She began by studying Irish folk tunes, which were to form the basis of her work. She eventually incorporated 4 melodies that had been published in an 1841 Dublin magazine. However, it was her intent not only to quote genuine Irish folk music, but also to absorb their musical language and use it in her own original themes. Beach began by writing the second movement, which we will examine. Her symphony, like Dvořák's, is traditional in its overall structure. It opens and closes with lengthy movements in sonata form, while the third movement is slow and expressive. The second movement begins with a complete representation of an Irish folk tune titled "The Little Field of Barley." After a brief introduction by the horns and strings, the tune is played by the oboe, a choice of instrument perhaps inspired by the English horn in the second movement of Dvořák's symphony. Accompanying drones and the clarinets and bassoon can be heard as imitating a bagpipe. At the conclusion of the melody, the tempo changes, suddenly becoming much faster. We then hear a series of variations on the tune. The first is provided by the violins, who play a rapid series of high sparkling notes. Then next, we hear from the winds, who pass the theme back and forth with the violins. The horn and English horn then take the theme to the minor mode. Upon the recovery of the major mode, the tempo slows and we hear the original tune once more from the English horn. At this point, the music swells dramatically, although a concluding fast passage features flutes and violins means that the movement ends with a smile. So, listen to this, and maybe as you're listening, try to keep these ideas in your mind and see if you can see them happening as you hear them occurring. So here's movement 2 of Amy Beach's Gaelic Symphony, which is titled Alla Siciliana, which is actually Alla Sicilian, so kind of interesting. And if you enjoyed the second movement, you might want to listen to the full, all 4 movements of Amy Beach's Gaelic Symphony in E minor, Opus 32. Very beautiful piece and important. The first really quality American symphony by many people's standards, and definitely the first symphony written by an American woman. And with that, we're coming to the last unit of this chapter in the last couple questions. This is starting on question 17, where we're talking about national representation in style and instrumentation. So not only can folk music be compelling, but we're also going to see that new instruments and new styles of music that emerge can also be linked to countries. In the previous section, we looked at 4 individual works that can be understood to express something about national identity. All 4 of these works, however, belong generally to the tradition of Western art music. When Lizst and Bartok wrote for solo piano, they contributed to the repertoire for pianists trained in the classical style. When Dvořák and Beach composed symphonies, they adhered to norms developed by 2 centuries of European composers. In other cases, however, entirely new musical traditions come to represent a nation's identity. Such traditions have unique characteristics and practices, and sometimes unique instruments as well. They become inextricably linked with national identity on an international level, and can serve to further the political interests of a nation. Such is the case with the tradition of steel band music, which developed in and came to represent the nation of Trinidad and Tobago. So here we see the instrument that we'll be talking about. They talk about the steel band, but really the key instrument of this ensemble and the universally accepted instrument of these islands, Trinidad and Tobago, are the steel pan, which you can see featured here. And of course, here's the Trinidad and Tobago flag, and also a look at what the island looks like, these 2 islands right here. Like South Africa, the nation of Trinidad and Tobago is largely defined by its colonial past. The modern nation consists of just 2 islands. Trinidad is the larger, and Tobago the smaller. These islands were first claimed as a Spanish colony in 1498. The invaders rewrote the demographics of the region, essentially eradicating the indigenous population while bringing vast numbers of enslaved Africans overseas to work in the agriculture sector. For this reason, citizens of African descent now make about 40% of the population. By the end of the 18th century, Spain struggled to supply enough settlers to oversee its island's industries. To this end, in 1783, the Spanish king invited French settlers to take over agricultural lands on the islands, resulting in French cultural influence. In 1797, however, the British took military control of Trinidad and Tobago, and the islands remained part of the British Empire until independence in 1962. As a result of British colonialism, English is the official language of Trinidad and Tobago, although most residents speak a creolized form that reflects the influences of several African languages. However, citizens of British descent make up only a small portion of the population. Following the abolition of slavery in 1838, Indian immigrants came to the islands as indentured laborers. Today, their descendants also make up about 40% of the population. Trinidad and Tobago, therefore, is a diverse nation in which African, Indian, and European influence can be discerned in everyday life. So here we see a representation of the carnival wear that we will get into the musical traditions associated with this festival of Carnival, even here in Trinidad and Tobago. And always interesting to see the colonial history. So question 17 is asking you about the colonial history of Trinidad and Tobago. Really, they lay it out right here on the previous slide and here on 57 as well. The vestiges of Catholicism brought centuries ago by Spanish and French colonists will be central to our discussion. Although only a fifth of the nation's population identify as Catholic today, one Catholic tradition in particular continues to have a major impact on the music of Trinidad and Tobago: Carnival. We discussed Carnival elsewhere in Chapter 4, for it played a significant role in the development of opera in Europe. Diverse carnival traditions have arisen around the world in the wake of European imperialism. Although no two traditions are identical, all facilitate exuberant celebration in the period leading up to the start of Lent. So this is, again, the second part of question 17, asking about how does Catholicism impact the carnival music, and also we'll see this genre called calypso music in a second. The history of Carnival in Trinidad and Tobago is tied to the history of the island's occupation. While Carnival was celebrated by the Spanish and French, it was suppressed by the British, who were not Catholic and did not approve of the celebration's excesses. Under British rule, Carnival was restricted to the Monday and Tuesday before Lent. The island's governors, however, could not put down the celebrations altogether, and during the 19th century they became increasingly exuberant, sometimes even violent. The early 20th century saw Carnival transformed into a more respectable event. This was accomplished through the institution of competitions for carnival participation, which perhaps the most coveted title, Calypso Monarch, going to the performer of the best new calypso song. So here we see a way of organizing this celebration to make it a little bit more tame. So maybe we are suppressing the culture a little bit, but again, once people have this avenue to express themselves through music and dance and these wonderful parades, people go all out with it and start to embrace it, actually. Music was always very central and very important to Carnival. The calypso tradition developed among enslaved Africans and has roots in the sung storytelling of West Africa. Here, however, we will focus on the dance music associated with Carnival, in particular, that performed on the nation's indigenous instrument, the steel pan. So this is, again, the development of this instrument right here, that maybe you've seen the steel pan, or the steel drum it's sometimes called. Steel pan music developed out of an older tradition of dance music known as Tamboo bamboo. Both traditions had something important in common. The instruments could be constructed at no cost out of readily available materials. Tamboo bamboo was performed using hollow bamboo sticks, which were stamped on the ground to create complex rhythm patterns. The various dimensions of the sticks meant that they produced different tones. Tamboo bamboo developed after drums were banned by the British in 1834, but the practice was itself banned a century later as part of the ongoing attempt to quell the carnival festivals. So this is question 18, asking you about what was Tamboo bamboo, And why was it created to replace drumming music? Your answers are all right here. That the fact that drums were actually banned by the British, so that the people who brought their drums with them, or the drumming culture from Africa, the enslaved Africans, they were actually banning their instruments as a way of suppressing culture, essentially. Now, I didn't know much about this, so I found some very interesting videos. This first one here talks a little bit about the preservation of the Tamboo bamboo culture and kind of bringing it back, even though it was outlawed. And then this is actually a real performance, or a street performance, of a carnival style parade where we actually see the Tamboo bamboo being performed as part of the event. So both really interesting videos and very beautiful music to actually hear these complex patterns, and the pitches that these bamboo sticks make are absolutely incredible. So I encourage you to check out both of those videos to get more information. Okay, so we're jumping now into question number 19. What is the panorama competition? What are some of the conflicting views on the kind of music that should be performed by a steel band? So as we saw across this chapter, music is incredibly important for the associations and the national character of any country. So when we create these music festivals that we're going to see, including the panorama competition, we're going to also see conflicting views about what music should be played by these new instruments, the steel pan. The process began in 1949 when a government steel band committee was formed to promote steel pan music. The committee in turn formed the Trinidad and Tobago Steel Band Association and founded the Trinidad All-Steel Percussion Orchestra. In 1952, a steel band category was added to the National Trinidad Music Festival, which had been established in 1948 to celebrate and encourage the European concert tradition. When steel bands participated in the music festival, they played European classics arranged for steel pans. Finally, in 1963, the Panorama competition was founded to celebrate the independence of Trinidad and Tobago. Panorama is a highlight of the annual Carnival celebrations, and it continues to honor the band who gives the best performance of a recent dance hit. So here we can see again the steel pan close up, and sometimes we'll even use two sticks or two rubber tip sticks to play on the pans, and one player might play two pans at once in this kind of tenor range pan. This not the highest sound, but close to one of the higher pitched ones, but has actually two pans to produce tones. So we already learned a little bit about the Panorama Festival. It is a competition held at every carnival where they celebrate the dance music that is called seco. We're going to get to that in a little bit. Over the first few decades of its existence, the steel pan became an extraordinarily flexible instrument. It had to be, seeing as it was used to play both nuanced symphonic classics and energetic dance music. An individual instrument has a full set of chromatic pitches, analogous to the keys on a keyboard, spanning at least one octave. So it can play all the same notes as the piano can, as far as the black and the white keys. Pans come in a variety of sizes, from the small tenor or lead pan to the bass pan, which requires multiple physical drums with just a few pitches each. So as the steel pans get bigger, the notes or the cavities where each note is found also has to get bigger. So on the bass pans, you might see someone playing 5 or 6 at once because each one can only hold a couple of these low sounding pitches. A steel band will contain dozens of pans in a variety of sizes. The pans are played using rubber-tipped mallets, which are often rolled, repeatedly struck in a rapid pattern on the instrument to create a sustained pitch. So this rolling is just moving the two sticks back and forth quickly, just similar to a drum roll sound. So here's a great video of the solo steel pan. If you've never seen the instrument played up close, this is nice because it actually shows how the inner parts of the bowl are actually crafted and how you'd have to move your hand so dexterously to get around the instrument. Steel pan musicians have always valued their ability to play classical music. From the beginning, the performance of concert music demonstrated the sophistication of the instrument and the musicians, who at first were all members of the black community, in front of an international audience that was skeptical of their worth. In fact, the desire to play classical music well steered the development of the instrument, and many of its contemporary features, such as the suspension of the pans from metal frames, exist to facilitate concert performance. However, steel bands, or steel orchestras as they are often called, don't take on classical repertoire primarily to prove themselves. The musicians play concert music because they love it and because it is deeply meaningful to them. So here we see an argument for the playing of classical music on these instruments that we'll take into the next slide here on 65 as well. This talks about the Afro-Trinidadian community objecting and maybe stating more about how they should only play their own music, not to have to resort to the European tradition. We will examine a performance from the 1992 World Steel Band Music Festival, which developed out of the Trinidad Music Festival in 1964, 1 year after Trinidad and Tobago gained independence. This festival celebrates the diverse capabilities of the instrument, for each competing band must perform both an arrangement of a calypso and selection from the European concert tradition. However, this structure has not been without conflict. In the years following independence, some representatives of the Afro-Trinidadian community insisted that steel bands should only play indigenous music, not that of the colonizers. Other factions were unwilling to sacrifice music they loved in order to make a political statement, and believed that European influence could make Afro-Trinidadian music better. These kinds of political concerns still preoccupy performers in the European tradition in all parts of the world. That is kind of giving us the final thoughts on question number 19. In 1992, the Invaders chose the fourth movement of Beethoven's Symphony No. 5 for their festival performance. The Invaders are one of the oldest steel bands in Trinidad, tracing their lineage back to the earliest days of steel pan development. They have been equally successful performing concert repertoire and dance music, taking prizes at both the World Steel Band Music Festival and Panorama. For this performance, the Invaders add percussion instruments taken from the symphony orchestra, including a set of timpani. They dress in a manner that reflects concert hall practice, tuxedos for men, elegant matching jackets for women, and are led by a conductor. None of these elements would be present if the Invaders were competing at Panorama, but they are all considered appropriate for a performance of Beethoven. They do not read from sheet music as the orchestral musicians would, but have instead memorized their parts. The Invaders play all the notes just as Beethoven wrote them. The sound of the ensemble, however, is quite unlike anything Beethoven could have imagined. So here's the performance that we're talking about in question from 1992, the Invaders performing Symphony No. 5, Movement 4 from Ludwig van Beethoven. This is a great representation of the classical tradition of the steel orchestra. So pause this video and check out this recording here. Now we're already moving into question 20 now. How do steel arrangers transform popular songs from the dance genre soca into calypso steel band arrangements? Give some details about how does Leon Smooth Edwards transform the song Full Extreme and makes the most of the steel pan as an instrument. So here we go. Our second performance from the 2017 Panorama competition is quite different. At Panorama, it is typical for a steel band to perform an arrangement of a hit song from the previous year. These arrangements are more than just transcriptions for steel band. That is to say, the members of the ensemble do not simply play the notes of the song on their instrument. Instead, steel band arrangers use the song as a starting point from which to craft elaborate variations. The resulting composition is usually about 10 minutes long, in contrast to the 3-minute popular song on which it is based, and demonstrates the full range of the ensemble's capabilities. Although steel bands used to perform arrangements of songs of the genre calypso, in recent years they have turned to a new genre of carnival music, soca. Soca is a variety of electronic dance music. Unlike calypso, soca songs value danceability over lyric content. They are closely associated with Carnival and often celebrate the spirit of freedom and joy that imbues the festival. So in modern days, you often will hear this kind of soca dance music blasting on these huge trucks that are fitted with speakers to play these dance-like pop songs, electronic pop songs, or dance music. So some people would say, back to question number 19 just a second, some people would say that the steel band should be playing classical music. Other people would say it should be playing calypso, and other people are saying that it should now play elaborations of this soca music, which is kind of a hybrid now between calypso and the soca dance electronic music. During Carnival, the new songs for that year are blasted from speakers carried through the streets on truck beds. Although recorded soca has largely displaced live steel band performances in Carnival parades, the musical practices continue not only to coexist, but to influence one another. In 2017, the group The Trinidad All-Stars took first place in the Panorama competition with their arrangement of the soca song Full Extreme, which was released that same year by the band The Ultimate Rejects. The song is characterized by its lively beat and repetitive melodic and textual refrains. The lyrics, which reflect a local English dialect, celebrate the party spirit that cannot be quenched even by recession and disaster. The music video reinforces this message as costumed carnival goers dance despite the oppressive presence of uniformed police. The refrain, "We jammin' still," captures the power of carnival to overcome centuries of attempted repression. So this is the soca song called Full Extreme by a group called the Ultimate Rejects. This is a great example of soca. You're not going to hear the steel pan orchestra quite yet. This is more of the electronic dance music that is now very popular in the modern era in Trinidad and Tobago. We also see similar traditions happening in Brazil, where Carnival is also celebrated to a big extreme, a huge performance, typically these huge parades in Brazil, where they are also celebrating Carnival and are using it to get the newest songs out to the people. And then there are these competitions. So there are some similarities in these two cultures. The extended performance of Full Extreme by the Trinidad All-Stars, so this is a steel orchestra group pictured here, fully captures the soca song's energy, even though it includes no text. So it's the same music arranged, but now with no lyrics. So I hope that on the previous slide that you watched this music video for Full Extreme by the Ultimate Rejects. Central to the performance, of course, is the arrangement itself. Steel pan arrangers are highly regarded in the pan community, and the best are competitively recruited by the bands who hope to win Panorama. Get it? Panorama? This 2017 arrangement of Full Extreme was created by Leon Smooth Edwards. Edwards was born in the capital of Trinidad and Tobago, Port of Spain, where he became involved with steel pan music at a young age. He played with the Trinidad All-Stars from 1968 to 2002, continuing to participate in Carnival even after immigrating to the United States in 1988. Edwards began arranging in 1975 and won his first Panorama as an arranger in 1980. Full Extreme was his 9th win. So already we see that the calypso arrangers, the steel band arrangers, are highly sought after and recruited so that the whole team, in this case it's the Trinidad All-Stars, the whole ensemble can potentially win this big competition at Panorama. And we saw on the previous slide here that the songs are usually made longer. We saw that on slide 68 here, that the arrangements are not just exact transcriptions, they're actually making a full arrangement with elaborate variations. So when you listen to this, remember that this is the same song right here, this video example of Full Extreme by the Trinidad All-Stars. So this is the full live instrumental performance. It's the same song. I encourage you to watch this and compare it to the soca version of Full Extreme that we saw on the previous slide. Here's some more information about how that comes to be from the arrangement standpoint. In Edwards' arrangement, you can hear the basic melodic elements of the Ultimate Reject song. However, his arrangement is considered good because of the many ways in which it departs from the original, which is too repetitive to be interesting in a purely instrumental version. In particular, Edwards makes use of the chromatic capabilities of the steel pan, writing passages that require players to strike almost every note on the instrument. He also contributes variations on the melody of the song. Finally, he occasionally interrupts the rhythmic groove, which has the effect of heightening the rhythmic excitement of his arrangement. The Trinidad All-Stars performing is strong not only because they play all the correct notes at the correct times, but because they exude energy throughout. The best steel band players, like the best performers in many traditions, become physically involved in the music. So you'll see them dancing and really feeling the beat together. It makes them that more exciting to watch and really keeps them unified as a group too. There are a number of additional noteworthy differences between the All-Stars performance of Full Extreme and the Invaders performance of Beethoven. The players wear a coordinated uniform, but they are t-shirts, not tuxedos. They do not require a conductor, but are instead led by the rhythm section, which contains a drum set and various timekeeping instruments, not the timpani drums. Before the performance begins, we can hear the succession of metallic strikes that set the music in motion. Appropriately, the rhythm section in this type of steel band is referred to as the engine room. The level of dedication and professionalism, however, is the same, as steel bands practice intensely and in secret in the months leading up to Carnival. So again, watch this great video. If you've never heard of this, it's incredibly exciting music to listen to these steel orchestras play these soca arrangements. And for some further listening, this is another group that I encourage you to listen to, the Exodus Steel Orchestra, who also is a tremendously good group. I like this video because it shows how big the ensemble really is because they get multiple camera angles. You'll also be able to see the different sizes of the pans. We see here, this person is playing probably 4 different pans, whereas the smaller ones, they're only playing 2. We see some people in the back playing sets of 3. So these show the different sizes of the instrument, and also the pitches that they produce are in different ranges, low, medium, and high pitched usually. And going back to see how these drums are made and kind of the history of the instrument, this is a 1956 documentary which talks about how to make steel drums, and it is very interesting to see this time period of 1956 when the drums were really starting to become popularized. And that brings us to the end of the chapter. I hope that you guys enjoyed. Be sure to answer all the questions, to quote the chapter, and to watch all the listening examples that are required to complete the assignment. Some other ones like this that say further listening or further viewing are not essential for the homework, but if you find it interesting, you might want to watch these videos as well. Okay, with that, I will leave you to it, and I will see you guys next week for our next lesson. Thanks so much.